Hi, I'm Corbin Fry. Welcome to BTV's World War II documentary, World War II, A Time for Heroes. Throughout the years of 1939 and 1945, the world was engulfed with the greatest war man has ever seen. We now know it as World War II. Throughout the war, many lives were lost and heroes made. This documentary tells their stories. Hi, I'm Corbin Fry. Welcome to Chapter 5, the Pacific Theater of BTV's World War II, A Time for Heroes documentary. While the war raged on in the West, an ever-growing conflict between America and Japan still had to be fought. Battles all over the Pacific erupted in places like Iwo Jima, the Aleutian Islands in Alaska, New Guinea, and the Philippines. These would all become crucial points in the outcome of the war.
I think the Japanese had imperial ideas about conquest, and they had it planned. So I think Pearl Harbor was just part of it.
When World War II, we had one in Aleutian Islands. A lot of people do not know of this because this was in '42. We have islands that goes from Alaska over to Russia. And the Japanese landed on the island of Kiska in April of '92. That's America. And we had to go up and stop that before they would go to the next island and then end up to Alaska and come down through Canada to America. So we went up there and captured those two islands back where they were. The Japanese pulled out the other islands and headed back to Japan.
I was in the Navy on a fleet tanker, which was a supply ship. We followed the battleships, the war vessels, in other words, the one that did the actual fighting, to supply their needs for fuel, mostly. But we carried excess of ammunition and so forth also. We tried to have whatever they needed as much as possible. And we went all over the Pacific, but was always with the battle fleet or right behind them to supply. We went through the Marshall and Gilbert Islands, which they had already, battles had already been fought before we got there. But then we went to the Philippines. That was a big battle. We went in and retook the Philippines. And then we went to Iwo Jima, which that was a tough fight. But Okinawa was the big one. We were at Okinawa and we got a suicide and a bomb there while we were at Okinawa. But I was fortunate not to be injured and was fortunate that a ship wasn't sunk.
Ultimately was assigned to a destroyer escort, which is a cheap destroyer. They had to turn those ships out fast in World War II, and they were very much like a destroyer, and we were supposed to serve in the Atlantic as anti-submarine ships, but they needed some in the Pacific too, and so our ship was one of the ones that went over to the Pacific. I was turned out to be a radar operator and later a radar technician. which meant I had to repair the radars whenever they broke, which was a little complicated because if the radio at that time had more than 2 knobs, I couldn't operate it. But they made me a radar technician. So that was my job in the Navy.
I was chief yeoman, which is comparable in the Army would be master sergeant.
Me and a buddy of mine was sitting standing on the back of the fantail of that thing, looking out and watching San Diego disappear over the horizon. And we got up there, and we were losing the war in the South Pacific. There were thousands of ships being sunken. There were a lot of people being killed. So I said, Sammy, you think we'll ever see a good old USA again? Well, I don't know. You know, but we were geared up and trained for it, so we can make it out. Well, that's the feeling you had, you know. You don't know, you didn't know if you see it or not. So we went down, and then we went on and got to Pearl Harbor.
I was on the USS Antietam. It was a CV-36. It was an aircraft carrier, and we had approximately 100 airplanes and about 2,000 men. And it was probably, well, at that time it was the largest ship that was in the service at that time. We had F-6s, TBMs, and SB-2Cs. Those are the planes we had aboard ship.
While I was in Townsville, done maintenance on aircraft. I remember one thing was putting in fuel cells in a B-24, and to my surprise, I could set up in the wing of those B-24s. They were that thick. They don't look like it.
We had the M1 rifle. We had the little carbine. We had, matter of fact, I had a Thompson submachine gun for a while. I had a 45 revolver, or automatic, not a revolver. And I learned to qualify on the old Springfield, 1912 Springfield, which was a good rifle, but slow as far as later models, but accurate. But it kicked you like a mule.
And you had regular duties you had to do. We had to keep the ship clean and keep it in everything in order. One of my jobs, of course I had people that could do it for me, one of my jobs was put out the plan of the day. Every morning we had to put out a sheet of what was going to happen that day. I used that for years after I got out of the Navy. My wife would tell me, well, we're going to do so-and-so, and I said, well, I won't be able to do it till I see the plan of the day.
I was in the Navy. I was all over the South Pacific. Missed quite a few battles because I was 2 years late getting in. I didn't go into early in '44. But went all through the battle for the Philippines when we retook it, and also battle for Iwo Jima, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. And then just before the war ended, we was traveling with the fleet during the bombardment of Japan, when the B-29s were hitting Japan so bad, and our aircraft carriers were going in close to the Japanese shore in order for Navy planes to definitely attack. And we was traveled with the fleet all up through there. So we was exposed to a lot of Japanese suicide planes the last year or so of the war. That was their best defense against our age, was Japanese defense. They were suicide bombers.
Mm-hmm.
Fright, strain, out of food, a lot of casualties and injuries around you, which I was never experienced before. And this puts a strain on you. To sum it all up, it makes a boy a man before his time.
There was a tremendous amount of fighting left in the Pacific, don't get me wrong. And we had a lot of casualties in the Pacific. Some battles over there were among the most heavily casualties. I don't know what that means, but produced more casualties than any other battle in history, Okinawa, Iwo Jima, and so on. But there was no question as to the outcome of that war after the Battle of Midway. So Pearl Harbor, in terms of the Japanese point of view, was not a strategic success. It was a great success from a long-range point of view, but not from a short-range point of view, but not from a long-range point of view. So they were not wise in choosing to do that.
And we had, what I worked on mostly was what they call the ARC-1. It was a 10-channel transceiver, and we could transmit on 10 different frequencies and receive on 10 different frequencies. And the frequency was just below your TV camera or frequency today at about 50 megacycles. And we had IFF, which is identification friend or foe. And what they would do is send a signal out, and if you didn't send the right signal back, well, they shot you down. I mean, it was how they identify our own people. And each ship had a different frequency, and every time they flew, they had different frequency. So nobody knew what frequency it was on.
And so we got on a wood arc there, and we set our setup and started a rotating. The thing would rotate 360 degrees continuously. It was about 12, 14 foot across and about 70 foot tall, this antenna was. And there was a prime mover to move that whenever we had to move it. And that was my job, to drive that prime mover and help put it up too, of course. And finally we got set up, and we'd run there and we'd give reports into the island command, tell them any airplanes they had. A bogey was an unidentified plane. And then we had a signal on our radar set that we'd turn on called IFF, identification friend or foe. And so whenever they go out in a place and we see an airplane, we'd tell them, we'd turn our IFF on, and our IFF would trigger their friendly IFF, but the enemy plane didn't have that. So we knew it was an enemy plane, and we considered the enemy until we knew better. So then they would come in, and we in the meantime would sit there and just keep running and making records of what we was doing and all. We had, I think it was 4 crews, and we ran 8 hours around the clock. Well, that would be on 24, no, 3 crews, 8 hours around the clock. And we tried to spread our equipment 100 feet apart or so, and see if in case they dropped a bomb, we wouldn't wipe the whole thing out.
The battle for the Philippines, Leyte and Luzon, and later the Ryukyu Islands, which the island we was on was Ieshima. It was the island that Ernie Pyle was killed on. And we were there when the war ended. We were supposed to go to Japan for occupation duty, but we were sent home prior to the time they could find shipping to get us to Japan. We were about 800 miles from Japan at the time.
We were in the Philippines, and at Iwo Jima, and at Okinawa, which is when the Kamikaze planes started.
After I was assigned to radar, I went to radar school, which was at Virginia Beach, Virginia, in an old hotel. Really, it is a nice hotel. And it had once been a resort hotel, you know, for civilians up to the war, and the Navy took it over as a school. So I went to school there for about 6 or 8 weeks, learning to operate and use the radar. On the ship I was on, we had 2 sets of radar, what was called surface search for surface ships, and then we had air search for airplanes. So I operate both sets on those sets.
I was a Marine in a defense battalion. That's what it was. We defended the island and all our actions in that. But we went, in order to get from one place to the other, where you had to get on a ship and go, see. Someplace along the line, why I think it was from Woodlark. We went down to past New Guinea, I believe it was, past New Guinea, and went on down to Australia. And that's where I trained about winches. That's where that came into being. Well, they had laboring people from Australia to help us unload these ships down there. I don't know what we was unloading it for. I really don't know that, because that's kind of got lost in my memory. I don't remember what that was. But anyway, I was unloading a big gun and they had operators down there for the winches. These operators did it all the time. They were really good, and we were just to fill in if we had to. They were putting a big old 9mm gun in the car down over that, and they weighed about 14 ton or more. Those guns did. They're big, and big, heavy, thick, and they weigh heavy, and they have to be heavy in order to take that impact of that big thing exploding. Anyway, they let that thing down over the thing here, and all of a sudden the whistle blew and said, "Okay, tea time." And that big old gun swing back and forth and back and forth. I still see that thing swinging back and forth. Well, and about 2 hours later, they came back and they picked up their equipment back on again, started up again. In the meantime, the war was going on someplace in the South Pacific. But it was going all around us. But I didn't realize how much that was until I got home. All we had just a little bit of a note on a bulletin board. They had a bulletin board sitting out, usually out in the close to the mess hall, someplace where you could read up and see what was going on in the rest of the world. But I had no idea what was going on all around me. We got, well, you've heard of, you heard Guadalcanal, I guess. You ever heard of Guadalcanal? Well, that was one of the first places that the Marines landed on there, and it was a kind of a sacrificial thing. They were put on there and says, "Hold it at all costs." And I wasn't on that on there. I don't need. We did go past there, but I talked to some people that were on there, and they had Japanese on it. It was real battles in that, and so was it on Cape Gloucester, and we had real battles on Cape Gloucester too. But
The fighter planes took off. They could take off in a shorter distance than any other aircraft. Excuse me. And what we would do is the first few planes would be catapulted off. And I don't know if you ever saw a catapult, but it hooks onto the plane and it's run by steam. And within about 200 feet, they're going a couple 100 miles an hour. I mean, if you don't have your head back on the pad in the cockpit, it can knock you out. You have to have your head back because the acceleration is so fast that your head will go back. And then when you leave the ship will drop down. We were about 100 feet off the ground, or off the water. And as the plane takes off, it drops until it picks up airspeed. And then it goes into the air, and as soon as they get in airborne, they'll give it a hard right to get out of the pattern because the next plane's coming right behind them. We had 2 catapults, and one catapult would fire, and that plane would take off, and the other one would be getting ready, and that catapult would fire. But I wasn't on the deck. I was on electronics. I took care of the electronics in the aircraft.
We were fighting for our own country. These little islands belonged to us. If we didn't stop that, they'd work their way on to the United States, which they did have a submarine one time emerge from the ocean and shoot bullets and stuff on San Francisco. Then they went back underneath the water again and sailed away. So this could have really happened if we hadn't have stopped them on those islands.
Well, I think the scariest moment probably was the thing I told you about the Marine camp that was hit that almost got us. As I say, 3 or 4 seconds more, it would have been the Marine camp, it would have been us. And probably that, it's kind of scary having a bomb coming right at you. And you know it. Of course, we did have our foxholes that we jumped in, but almost every night we'd have an air raid because what they wanted to do was damage our airstrips so our planes couldn't take off and fight them. So they'd come over at night and try to damage. A matter of fact, I saw what's called a sheep's foot roller, a construction machine that they were lengthening the strip, and they were also sending planes off while they were still building the strip. And this pilot wasn't able to pull up, and he rammed right into our own sheep's foot roller. Well, the driver of the machine, the sheep's foot roller, he peeled off because he saw the pilot coming and knew he couldn't make it, but the pilot was killed. And of course the whole thing went up in flames.
Proceeded then back to our assignment again was back to the Pacific. We proceeded back to the Pacific and through Pass Pearl and head into the southwest of Guam. Our first campaign out there as a fighting vessel was Iwo Jima. We participated in the bombardment of Iwo Jima and, of course, the taking of Iwo Jima. And about 30 days later, we moved up to Okinawa and did the same thing at Okinawa.
My brother was, I have to tell you this so you know he wasn't stupid. Our high school principal said he was the only true genius she ever had the privilege of teaching. So, you know, he wasn't stupid. But anyway, he tried 9 times for officers candidate school. And then was rejected. So but he thought, well, he might as well fill out another form. What the heck, you know. So he sent it in and he was accepted. So the 10th time he went to Australia for officers candidate school. And the day after he left, his whole outfit was wiped out. That's bad. But see, those guys have to live with that when they come back. Can you imagine walking, when you're in an outfit, in the Army or anything like that, you're family. You're not just another buddy or something. And he left his men. I'm sorry, I'm just emotional.
Well, we operated a lot under Admiral Halsey. If you've studied the history of World War II, you've heard of Halsey and Screw. They were the overall commanders of the battleships. Of course, we were under their command to a certain extent because we were their supply ships. Our captain on the ship that I was on was an old merchant marine captain. And they had drafted him because he was a good navigator and knew how to handle a ship. But as far as him handling men, he had very little to do with the crew. He had an executive officer under him that was more or less a go-between for the crew.
I don't know if you ever heard this, but a landing on an aircraft carrier, they called a controlled crash. A plane's coming in and he's probably doing about 120 knots and he has a tail hook. And they fly with the tail down and that tail hook hooks onto a cable. And that arresting cable is probably an inch steel cable. And it has big pistons underneath the flight deck. And when that plane hits, these pistons slow the plane down and they stop them within like 50 feet. Now you're going over 100 miles an hour and all of a sudden in 50 feet you stop. Well, sometimes those cables would break. And we had planes come in that didn't have any flaps, so they couldn't slow up. We had planes come in, didn't have tail hooks, so they went right into the barrier. And the barrier is like 5 cables about 10 feet high. And these planes would just fly right into them. And of course they catch on fire. And one of our men was, they called him Hot Pappy. He had an asbestos suit. And his main job was to go get the pilot out. But the worst is when a plane would come in with only one wheel. The one wheel wouldn't go down, the other one wouldn't come up. And when they hit the deck, the plane would start spinning like a top. And you had no idea where they were going to go. And a lot of men got hurt that way. Yeah.
So they build roads around, and while we were there, we had quite a number of radar tower attacks, and we set up our equipment away from, let's see now, in that case, if you were over that, I was on Cape Gloucester at that time. I get these places all mixed up. Cape Gloucester, and finally they got our location picked up, but when we first got off of there, off of the landing craft, not over there, we pulled off the side and we were trying to get up there, and they said, just get the hell out of the way. Yeah, they're bringing all the trucks and ammunitions up, and we pulled off in the brush and sat and waited. And we could hear the big guns going off and the airplanes going over and bombing over there. You could hear all that where we were at, and we were about maybe a mile away from it. So when our people were up there, when our people hadn't got their guns there yet, ours was, I don't think we joined, the gun battery I don't think joined us right away, that was later. So we waiting for and finally they got our location. We just pulled off the side and left all our equipment set right there, and we stayed right with the equipment the whole time. So they told us, and when they got this equipment, they said, here's a case of grenades, save those, and nobody take them away from you. You use that to destroy this equipment if the enemy overruns you. Well, okay, I did so. The top sergeant came running out there. He said, give me your grenades, give me your. I said, no, sir, I can't do that. Well, he outranked me quite. He says, give me those, give me those. I said, oh, okay. He said the Japanese had broke through up there. So what happened that night? Boy, what a miserable night that was. Didn't know when it was going to come out. 4 or 5 of our own men crawled in front of that truck cab one time, all right inside the cab. I thought, well, anyhow, if they jerk the door open, at least we got a fighting chance. And we all stayed there all night long, and that crammed up in that train. Next morning, well, nothing happened. So the officer came around. I said, what in the world happened? I thought the Japanese big. Oh, he said, it wasn't broke through. We just got the wrong signal out. All it was a swamp up there, and our forces went around the swamp. But it left that area open in the middle that they could have done if they wanted to. But they were probably watching it, but we didn't know that. It was a miserable night on there. But
Well, then they came back and we trained again in California. Then we went to some islands in the Pacific where the Japanese were holding. And we talked, the Marshall Islands, and a fellow we wound up in the Philippines, in the Luzon Islands, because they were all held by the Japanese. They call it island hopping. That's what the Japanese were doing, so that's what we did to get them back.
As a matter of fact, we had an officer standing back there one day, and the cable snapped when the tail hooked, and he ducked, and it cut his hat right off in half. I mean, that cable was just like a knife when it breaks. Nobody was allowed on the catwalk. The flight deck was about 6 feet, 5 feet higher than the catwalk, and the catwalk was just about 2 feet wide, and it went all the way around the ship.
Well, when I went overseas, I first went to Australia. We did training there. We were about 30 miles from Brisbane, and it was a delightful place to be. Probably the most enjoyable place that I visited. From there, we went to New Guinea, the jungles of New Guinea at Finchhaven, and were there about 6 months. Rained every day in the afternoon. Muddy, hot, steamy. We were only about 4 miles below the equator. And as I say, we were camped in a coconut grove. They were dropping all the time. One of the fellows wouldn't even go to the latrine without wearing his helmet because he's afraid a coconut would drop on him. But we spent about 6 months there and moved on up to Leyte in the Philippines. I remember the airstrip there ended in the water because the island was so small and the airstrip just took off right over water because that's where they had to end it. From there, we moved on up to Luzon, which is the where Manila is, and spent about 6 months there, where we were subjected to almost nightly air raids.
He was in New Guinea, and he was a lab technician. Now, Michael knows more about that than I talked to him more about than he did me. But I said one time, and I told you my brother had to work in the outfit to open up the place for the planes to come in. And I said, this is behind the Japanese lines. My husband said, what do you mean behind the Japanese lines? Where they were, the Japanese would crawl in between their tents every night looking for food. They were starving. So, and a friend of mine was on that Bataan Death March. You heard of that? He was a doctor, and they were in the prison camp for quite a while. But they, let me see, where did I go with that one? Anyway, he said that everybody, including tall guys like you, get a little tiny bowl of rice every day. The Japanese were small. They could just barely exist with it, but that's why the Americans were down to about 98 pounds or something, or less when they were finally released. So it was not good. He said that, this was a doctor, he said that the Japanese were fair in the prison camp if you did what they said. But one of the guys was so hungry for something other than rice, he found a hot pepper and he ate it. They forced him to eat hot peppers till he died.
No, it wasn't that time. There was so much shooting going on It was when I was talking to some of my men, and talking to one, and I looked around and he wasn't there, and he was on the ground. And later on I found out he had been shot and was killed, and that was right beside of me. And when I thought about it that night, it made me think about it. Could have been me.
We always had to run out our foxhole when we was on Cape Gloss at that time. And see, I guess my time about up. Is it? No, okay. Well, I can rattle on. I could rattle on all night if telling I can get excited about it. And I'm trying to not get excited, but.
No, you're fine.
Anyway, we had a 9mm gun battery going up there, and there was one of these planes I was telling him about, and came around the island, went around the hill, and they were blinded to the radar until they got away from that mountain, and then we could see them. And we had our fire control, and we had a new Army group from the States over there on a lot of the guns sitting around. And when that guy came around the corner around there, well, he turned on his identification, and we knew who he was. But every gun on that island turned loose, and there was just a cone of fire going right up. Man, they had the searchlights on them. You could see the searchlight. All of a sudden, that plane just disappeared, and then you could see nothing but floating metal floating down. And its searchlights was on. See, evidently it was a direct hit. Most of the time the hits aren't direct, but you get close enough that an exploding shell will damage the airplane to bring it down. Or they come in, a lot of them airplanes are well made. Some of them they get damaged, some of them get wings blowed off. Of course they come down.
Ernie Pyle, who was a friend of the soldier, was killed on that little island, Jima, that I was on. Not while I was there, but there was a placard that soldiers had put up showing where the spot was that he was killed. And it was quite memorable.
I was wounded, blown up, knocked unconscious, had other fellows, soldiers, wounded or killed right by me. But that makes you stop and think. But at the time it's going on, it doesn't bother you as bad as it does when it's over with. Then you have time to think about it. Then's when it really upset you.
My younger brother, Bob, is still alive. He lives down the street here. But he was on a little destroyer escort. He was in the Navy. They only held 225 men. That's pretty small for an ocean-going ship. And he was at the Battle of Leyte. He was a cook and a baker, and they had to take turns on the ship with whatever. They all had a battle station. So anyway, he had to take turns with the guy who wanted to break, and he was the guy behind the wheel, and they had the what do you call that stuff, the picture up here about the, oh good gosh, can't think of it. Anyway, all that's going around about like x-rays or something. And he saw these ships out of the way, and he said, when the guy came back, he said, hey, look, who's all that? It looks like a fleet. He said, oh, he thought it was just Admiral Nimitz, our admiral. And Bob still didn't like it. And he went and talked to the quartermaster, and he said, hey, look at this. What's going on down there? The quartermaster said, oh, it's just Admiral Nimitz. Well, it wasn't too long before it was a whole Japanese fleet coming down on him. That was pretty scary. And anyway, he survived. They took on, there was quite a battle there. He said they would run with the clouds. They would make their own clouds, put the steam out, and make their own clouds and run, because they weren't big enough to fight the whole Japanese army, or Navy, excuse me. But he just, anyway, they finally, at the end of the battle, 4 ships had gone down. There were a lot of guys in the water, and they were able to take on 193 men. They couldn't take on more than that. It's a little tiny ship. But he's always sees those guys in the water that they couldn't pick up. It doesn't go away.
He was a pharmacy student at Butler University. I think it was Butler College back in those days during the war. And during World War II, people were drafted right out of college and had to go in, and he served in the Army. Because he was a pharmacy student, they made him a technical sergeant. And after training and that sort of thing, he was shipped off to the South Pacific. He was in the Philippines, New Guinea, and several other places. And the major job that they had there, one of the big problems that they had in the South Pacific with the troops, is malaria. And there wasn't any kind of cure for malaria, and the treatment was really rather poor. And so one of the things they tried to do was to do different kind of experimentation to come up with some sort of treatment for malaria. And it was really at that point that they came up with a way in which to treat malaria. And of course, eventually, from that, a medication was resolved so that it would prevent malaria. Now, once you get malaria, you've got it for the rest of your life. It's just in your body, and you can't get rid of it. So we're really proud of our father to be a part of that, working in that technical aspect. He returned from the war and became a doctor of pharmacology.
Another time, they were firing up in the air, and the guns, those shells on the end, they're exploding shells. You know, they're about the projectile port is about maybe that long, about that big around, and the rest of it's powder, gunpowder behind it. Well, we went up there, and they were shooting way up there, and they sounded the alarm. We had on our radar set, we had a siren that we turned on whenever we were told to turn it on, and we always report into the island command, and they would use that to set up alarm. Well, this time it come in there, and they were firing away up there, oh yeah, they was firing away. I forgot, I almost lost my train of thought. They was firing away, and we was in the tent, and I ran out and got we always had a foxhole we had to go to. We dug our own foxhole, and then we got in the tent. And that night, that came up like that, and I ran out and got in the foxhole, and that guns got up too high. If they got up too high, then that shrapnel from those guns would fall back down on us. And that time it did. I heard plunk, 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 plunk all around me. It was kind of scary. I went back to my tent, and right above where my head would have been in that ton if I stayed in there, there was a slit in the thing about this big. Well, and that's about the way that shrapnel comes out very sharp. And there was a piece of that shrapnel in that, but the tent absorbed that shock. It didn't go through. And if I'd have been in a tent, probably wouldn't have been hurt. I don't know. You never know whether the thing would have went on through or not. But just hearing those plunks of metal going, knowing that was metal, it's kind of scary. Yeah, it was kind of scary. But you kind of get used to it after a while. There's a lot of the guys that had worse jobs than I did. I was very, very fortunate getting in the radar, and that literally saved my life.
Well, our captain was in charge, Captain Manker, in charge of our group. I recall when Roosevelt died, he came down to the working line that we were working on and told us, and it struck him so much that he had tears running down his face. But he was our commander.
We landed on one island to take it back. The Japanese had been there 5 years. They were reinforced and dug in, which we didn't know how strong they were. And we had landed their forces there. We lost over 1,200 men the first hour trying to take this back, because we went in there with about 3,000 men against about 7,000 that had been there 5 years. And that really put a strain on us.
One of his other experiences, he had several actually, he was in the Philippines, I remember, and you kind of get to meet some of the native Filipinos there, and he was invited to dinner with a couple of buddies, which was okay rather than just the usual army chow. And so they went to the house and they had a nice dinner, and then the guy kept asking him questions about this, that, and other thing. And of course they went back to the camp that night, and the next morning these individuals came and started questioning him. Well, why were you at this guy's house? Because they just arrested the man. He was actually a spy for the Japanese. Well, they were unaware of that. Of course, they didn't give away any top secrets or that sort of thing anyway. But that was kind of an unusual experience.
One time I was assigned to anti-aircraft guns on the outside. And that's where I saw the torpedo. You could see them, they run in shallow, you know, underneath the water, but you could still see them. So we was fortunate, we had 2 or 3 of those that we missed us or we avoided.
I felt a loss because he stayed overseas writing about the soldier, and not the dedicated or the decorated soldier, just the common, ordinary soldier.
And our ship took in the invasion force, convoyed the invasion force, and then we stayed offshore and bombarded the shoreline to help in unloading the troops.
Primarily bombard the beach. We, by bombarding the beach, what happens is you got the island of Iwo Jima, and out about 3 or 4 miles is a row of destroyers. Out another 5 or 8 miles is a row of cruisers, and out another 5 or 8 miles is a row of battleships. And you're just cruising up and down or along the side of it and throwing shells over on the beach. You're not really aiming at anything. You're just trying to tear up make all the havoc you can.
When we were kids, they lived in Appleton, Wisconsin. I lived in Oshkosh. This was Depression time. You didn't go back and forth a lot. He was just a kid cousin over there. But I knew his mother and his grandmother pretty well. But anyway, he was the only Navy man in that group. He was a medic, and that made him a target. But if you read any of the story, he never quit, never slowed down. Somebody needed help, he was right there. And his son finally wrote the book with another guy. When he was alive, he came back. He was the last one to live, by the way. Came back to, I don't know if it was Antigo or Appleton that he wound up in, I think Appleton. But anyway, he was a mortician. And I think it helped him. He was the last one to die of the 6. I think it helped him because the Japanese were trained to be cruel. And I wouldn't sit here and tell you what they did. I couldn't read it. I had to stop. But he saw all that, and he had to take care of those guys. So when he got home, he would not ever talk about it. He had all his papers from the war, and he put them in the back closet of the mortuary. Wouldn't let him to see them. Wouldn't talk to any of the news groups that tried to get to him. Couldn't stand it. And his wife said that through the rest of his life, they'd go to bed and he'd go to sleep, and then pretty soon he'd start crying. That's how bad it was. But he lasted long. He lasted quite a long time. He just died a few years ago. But I think being a mortician helped him because he could respect the bodies he took care of.
We just patrolled up and down, and then, as I say, would shoot at the shoreline. And if we found out where some of the Japanese were, why, we would try to get our shells to land in that general area. But there was no hand-to-hand fighting. That's one of the advantages of the Navy. You have your bed, and you have your food and your dinner on a regular basis. And if you don't have those, that means you're in big trouble, because that means your ship's sunk. So there was that one disadvantage, which we really didn't have. Well, landing enough troops to be able to do that. That was done by the Marines and the Army after they had landed. And so we did have beach landings just like they did in Europe, only they were not quite as large. And Okinawa was the toughest battle of them all.
Same thing at Okinawa. Until Okinawa was pretty well taken, and then they used destroyers for picket stations, which was, to tell when any other enemy airplanes was coming in or that kind of problem.
We went through two typhoons when we was at Okinawa. The first one was up at Kadena Airstrip. I knew the wind speed got up to 120 mile an hour. But I heard this summer of 2004 on television where it got up to 140 mile an hour. And then we went down to Naha, and about 6 weeks later we had another one, but it wasn't near as bad as the one up at Kadena Airstrip. And then when we left from Naha, got on a boat, we come to Seattle, and most all the way from Okinawa to Seattle, we rode the edge of a storm. One night we had a great experience. There was a group of us sitting down below the main deck playing cards, and all of a sudden everything went over to the bulkhead. Next morning we learned that it rolled as much as she could go before going on over.
Each day was pretty much the same. We had sometimes, usually our shifts on watch, as they call it, was 8 hours. But at Okinawa, it was frequently 4 hours on and 4 hours off. And you had to get your rest, your food, and showers and that sort of thing, working around those various 4 hours. But they would, the planes would come in, we'd eat, go on duty, and then come off and eat and rest, and go back.
We were split, so for spectators on most of those big battles. But we did set off Okinawa there and watched a lot of the bombardment, and we could even see the soldiers fighting over on the island itself. We could tell where the battle lines were and how far they moved. Sometimes they'd move, looked like a couple hundred yards in a day. 24 hours was all. That was a real long, tough battle. Okinawa was, I guess, probably the toughest battle of the war in Japan. But really, Okinawa is considered part of the Japanese mainland, and they were fighting to the death to defend it.
And that was a little hairy with all those kamikaze planes coming over. The Navy lost more ships at Okinawa and more men than they did at Pearl Harbor. But ultimately, the Army and Marines took over Okinawa, and we left and went back to New Guinea, where I was later approved for a commission. And I got off the ship at New Guinea, and while I was waiting there, the war ended. Do you understand what radar is, by the way?
Somewhat.
It's we'd send out electronic beams, and then if it hit something, mainly airplanes, because I operated mostly the air radar, it would come back and it would tell us the distance, and then each time the line went around, it told you where it was at that time and how far away they were and what their speed was as they came closer to where we were. And that was a very great help in projecting what was going to happen when they got there. And it was a particular help with the kamikaze planes coming in, because we knew where they were coming from and that sort of thing.
And he said the most horrifying experience was when they were in transport ships and they were going from one island to the next. And he can remember that at that point in the war, that toward the end of the war, the Japanese were getting kind of desperate. And so to take out ships, they had these kamikaze pilots, and the kamikaze pilots, of course, were suicide pilots. And they would literally fly right down the smokestacks of the ships. and just blow the entire ship up. And he could see ship on right, ship on left, ship in front and back, and they were going down. And for some reason, he was blessed along with all of the men on that ship, and theirs wasn't sunk. But that was a horrible thing, and just like my mother was talking about, men jumping from these ships that are being destroyed, and the men are on fire, and there's fuel in the water, and that's on fire, and men trying to swim around this stuff and escape, and it was a horrible, horrible graphic thing. So people come back from war very, very scarred mentally from those kinds of things.
They came just to dive into the ships. They figured that was one way to do it, and they trained the Japanese pilots just to take off and fly. They didn't teach them how to land, because they just said when you get there, you pick out a ship and you go and try to hit it with the plane. It's not a very favorable way to win a war, but that was their, well, sort of desperate measure at that point. Okinawa was the last island before the main islands of Japan, and where we would have based many troops if we'd had to invade Japan.
We was assigned picket stations there, kind of like you'd have a guard out to check on things. On April the 6th, we shot down 2 suicide planes. Thought, well, we made it through, we probably won't have any more problems. On April the 12th, we took another attack of suicide planes and sunk our ship. About 2:30, 2:40 in the afternoon, we was in the water for various times. I was in the water about 3 hours, picked up by a rocket ship, and taken back, put on board ship.
We had 2 of those planes after us at the same time, and we shot one of them down, and the other one though hit us and dropped a bomb on us. And it fell, the bomb fell right on the top of our high-octane aviation gas tank. See, we carried gasoline for the aircraft, on aircraft carriers. And it was almost empty, which is the most dangerous time because there's more fumes in that tank. And the bomb hit on top of that tank, but fortunately it glanced off. It went on up the forward part of the ship and went down the paint locker. Wow. It exploded in the paint locker, and of course it set it afire. We had quite a fire, but we did manage to put it out, and was able to return back to base under our own power. Wow. But we had a couple of men blown overboard. Of course, the Japanese pilot was killed when his plane landed on the ship.
That's amazing.
So we scraped him up with a shovel and put his remains back in the ocean.
But we were hit, but the ship we were convoying, a baby carrier, was hit, and we had to pick up some of the survivors.
But one thing I remember in particular was we had a fellow on board ship that he was a seaman, and when the ship was getting ready to sink, he came up on deck and probably should have left the ship at that stage of the game because we'd already passed word abandon ship. But he turned around and went right back down in the hold forward. And of course I never did see him again after that. The ship sank in 2 parts. We took 2 Baka bombs, 2 suicide planes, midships, and it broke the shafts and broke the keel, and the ship sank with the middle part going down first and the 2 ends sticking up, the bow and the stern.
Their principal target was aircraft carriers. That was their #1 target. And then I was on a tanker, and that was about their 2nd or 3rd choice. Ammunition ship was another good choice. See? Something that carried a lot of fuel, high-octane fuel, or ammunition. A good direct hit, you explode the whole ship, and that's what they were after.
They came at dawn and at dusk, and they would always get at least 1 ship and maybe more. But we were not hit, but there was always a possibility that we would be.
When a ship sinks like that, we're trained to get away from it as quick as you can because there's a suction and it will draw you down. Well, I just had my life jacket hooked on my arm, got out and swam. I probably swam 50 yards away from the ship. Never felt any undertow or anything like that. But then, of course, immediately while we was trying to get the fellows in a safe situation.
When you got in your sack at night, you could lay there and you think, now I'm floating on top of a whole lot of oil that would go up if something happened. But then you didn't think about it very much after a while.
On a ship, they have nets around the deck, and when the ship sinks to such and such a point, they release and come back up and float. And our objective was to get as many men as we could into those nets and save them. Now, one of the problems was the Japanese bombed and strafed us in the water, and we lost quite a few that way. I happened to be on the on a net with where our doctor was, and he would go around and check the fellows that had, and some of them were mutilated pretty bad, and he would say, this, you know, we're going to have to let him go. And the easiest way to take care of it at that stage of the game was just take them out of their life jacket or whatever the flotation device they had and let them go.
Anybody who tells you they weren't scared from time to time is lying to you.
You take when you, I'm going to go back to the first patrol we made, and we did a run on the surface. Now sometimes you didn't dive. If at night you could run on the surface and shoot, you know, and you can make an attack on the surface, and that we did. And the rain was real good, but what happened with this? Our hydraulic pump quit. We didn't have any hydraulic pump, so we couldn't dive, or we thought we couldn't. Actually, there was enough pressure in there after a couple hours. We had enough pressure in there that we got to cycle the vents one time and got down. After we got some ships, though, that was good. But I knew that, but it was, I knew that I knew the hydraulic system was out, and some of them didn't for a long time. They finally decided that, but then it was enough there that it would work. But we had trouble with hydraulic system for 3 or 4 patrols before they ever got them fixed, and it never was really perfect. But it was, makes you wonder, if you can't dive, what do? You know, you're sitting duck then, that's no good.
We got initiated pretty quick. When we went down to Aruba, which is just off of South America, and picked up a load of oil, crude oil for the ships, and went through the Panama Canal, headed to the South Pacific. We knew that's where we was going to have to operate. There was 2 tankers just alike, sister ships. We got to Caroline Island, our base where we operated from, and there was nothing there, just a small sand atoll, just a small island. No buildings on it except one building with a big refrigerator that kept drinks and so forth in there, and you could go over and play baseball or swim or whatever you wanted to on the beach. But anyway, when we arrived at the Caroline Islands that you lived in, they had an anchorage set up, and they had submarine nets all surrounding it, except just for a narrow passageway for the ships to go in and out to get inside the anchorage. And that was protected from Japanese submarines. So this afternoon, we got there a lot in the afternoon, the 2 ships. They told us to go to the right. They assigned us anchorage spots. The other tanker was told to go to the left, gave them an anchorage spot over there. About sundown, we was going to, everything was supposed to be secure. They was going to show us movies on deck. Had a movie camera and a screen set up on deck, and we just sat on the deck on our life jackets and so forth and to watch a movie. About the time the movie started, we heard a big explosion and looked, and this other tanker had been hit by a torpedo. A big Japanese sub had slipped in through this net some way and got inside, and why he chose that tanker instead of us, I never know, but at least he did. Or I'll probably be here today.
We got several depth charges every time. But, some of them were closer than the others. One time off of Borneo, I'll say this, our skipper went in too shallow water to make an attack, and when you're in too shallow water, it's just no good. You need deep water. You need at least 300 or 400 feet. And we was in 150 foot of water, and they caught us. And 3 of them, 2 get out here and they ping on you, know where you're at, and the other guy makes a run on you, so they really pin you down close. And And when they was going over, our ship was just going like that. They knocked the front end down, come back, and the depth charge the back end would go down. And see, we're 300 feet long at the time, and you're in that shallow water, so you can't have much of an angle, or you're going to stick your nose out of the top, you know, if you're off the bottom of it. So it's pretty scary.
We didn't know how many submarines there was or what had happened. All we knew was the ship was exploded where it was supposed to be in a safe harbor. And we had no idea. So they later found this one little submarine that on the ground. And that's all it was, of course. Nothing else happened. But at the time, we didn't know what to expect.
Laying off the bottom one time, they drove us down, and we made an attack on some ships, and they come over and water started right on top of us and drive us down. And we were tested to go 300 feet. That's at that time. That's the test that submarine. 90% of them. I get off of that. 90% of them was just tested for 300 feet. A couple, they built thicker wall submarine that could go deeper, but that's a test depth. But it really, when you're down there, like I say, it started hitting from the bottom, but it just kept driving. And we went to 200 feet, 300 feet, got down near 400 feet, and we were still going. They were still dropping depth charges right on top of us, so we couldn't, how deep we going, you know. So some of the boats we'd heard of went down as deep as 500 feet, you know. But they started leaking bad because we're not tested that deep. But we hit bottom. But we did hit bottom, and it was coral bottom. It was about 50 miles out to sea, out from right west of Saigon. It wasn't Saigon at the time, but we was east of there. I'm saying west, we was east of there. And on the bottom, and even 50 miles out, the tide still rocks you back and forth. The boat, we didn't know what we were sitting on. We were sitting on some coral. And it just made this ship sound like, you know, you take a tin bucket and put it on a piece of rock and rub it, you know, what kind of noise you echo. We got the echo too, it scared you, but he was glad to get out of there.
I think the scariest moment was the day that we first got out to Caroline Islands and they blew up this other tanker, because it was right near us. So it made us wonder why they chose that tanker instead of ours. So that's about as scared as I ever got, because we had just gotten out there. And we hadn't really been hardened to any war experiences at all at that time.
We were protecting the invasion force, but we were late for that. We were in the invasion fleet for Iwo Jima and for Okinawa.
I battled on Luzon. I know we made the napalm, which is the same stuff that they make in the flamethrowers. What we did, we made this stuff and loaded it onto the wing tanks and belly tanks of airplanes, which our pilots then would drop on enemy emplacements. And the battle for the pass at Baguio in the Philippines, which Baguio was the summer capital of the Philippines and not Luzon, or not Manila. But at any rate, they tried rushing through there. They couldn't do it. They tried howitzers and tried to open it up. So they decided that they would drop these napalm bombs on the pass. And I forget the outfit that, I think they were, I believe they were P-47s. They received a commendation for opening up the pass, and we received the similar commendation for loading the napalm. So probably that's one of the most significant battles we were a part of.
We come in Manila Harbor, and they were strafing and bombing Corregidor. That's a fortress, island fortress in Manila Harbor.
Matter of fact, one of our men was shot by our own people. He had been to Manila, and that night we had reports that Japanese were coming down out of the hills toward our camp. So he was coming back about midnight or so, not knowing that we had extra guards, and they heard him coming and opened fire on him and hit him in the eye. He was from Jasper. It didn't kill him, but of course it blinded him in that eye, and he was discharged. And I went to see him after the war was over, and he was a mess. He didn't even remember me. I felt so bad. But yes, we had some, matter of fact, I was an honor guard on one of the fellows who was killed, where we did the 21 gun salute. And you feel bad for something like that.
Well, we didn't have a great role in the Philippines. We did get shot up there, and the Japanese, in order to prevent us from landing more troops there, divided their fleet, and a secret fleet was coming down from the back in the Surigao Straits, and they had cruisers and destroyers and one battleship, and we were just a small force of DEs and baby carriers. Those were small carriers, not nearly as big as the regular carriers. And we accidentally ran onto them. And we got one hit, but for some reason, no one knows to this day why the Japanese, even though they had us heavily outnumbered, turned around and withdrew, which was a nice thing for them to do.
We were the first troop transport in Manila Harbor after it was liberated, the reason being the convoy commander, his son was captain of our boat. Well, we passed everybody just before we come to Manila, and we was wondering why. And he wanted to give his son the honor of being the first troop transport in Manila Harbor after it was liberated.
I don't know whether you boys have ever heard of the Bataan Peninsula and the Death March that they put our boys to, the Japanese did. We went across that same peninsula, and I recall seeing a Marine camp that had captured a Japanese emplacement. They had stuck sticks in the ground in front of their encampment, and they had a Japanese skull on each one. Kind of grisly. But because of the atrocities that the Japan soldiers had done to our people is why the Marines did this. Sort of a, I guess, payback.
After we left Clark Field, we went to Okinawa up at Kadena Airstrip and waiting to go to Japan. Of course, that I don't think would have been such a good experience then.
Torpedoes several times. You could see those things traveling through the water.
Oh, really?
And the ship would change course maybe. And that happened a few times.
Wow.
And the time came actually when I felt almost defeated. I'm sure some of the other boys did too. It seemed like we never had a chance to get home. Now when we got damaged by that Kamikaze, we thought, boy, we'd get to go home now and get our ship repaired. We didn't. They kept us out there, and they repaired the ship there in the Caroline Islands on a dry dock in the Carolines. So we didn't get to come home. It sent us right back. About 2 weeks, we was ready to go up to Okinawa again. So it was kind of discouraging. It looked like we couldn't see the end of the war. So when they dropped the first atomic bomb, that was real welcome news, because we felt like the end of the war was about over.
So before I got off the ship, we started experimenting And they took a TBM, and that's what President Bush got shot down in. It had a bomb bay in it, and they took the bomb bay doors out and they put a parabola in it, which is for radar. And they flew the plane up about 2,000 or 3,000 feet. And the plane acted as the antenna, and it would fly around the ship, circle the ship at about 2,000 to 3,000 feet above ground. Well, that meant that you could see more of the Earth that way. And we could pick up submarine surface 300 miles away. And then to keep from anybody jamming it, they took 2 of my transceivers, which is 10 different frequencies. So they had 20 different frequencies. And the frequencies would go back and forth, and they keep changing it. Transmitted on one, it came back on another one. So nobody could jam it. It kept changing frequencies all the time.
Well, I found that in a cave on Jima. I know it belonged to a Japanese soldier at one time, and I just happened to see it in there, and I think it's the only souvenir I brought home as a reminder of World War II. It was the Jima had one big mountain on it that they called the $1 Million Hill, because ships had stood off and poured artillery into that hill because the Japanese were in there and they were trying to neutralize their position. So after the island it was only about 5 miles by 3 miles big. It's across from Okinawa. But after it was neutralized, then we moved in and used it as a basis of operations for our activities. And going into that cave, this is where I found this. So, as I say, I think it's the only souvenir I brought home from World War II.
And then we finally landed out and Pelleru was a terrible operation. Not for me, I don't even take any credit for that, but it was for the people that had to make the landings on it. So out, I think it was on the west side of Pelleru, there was a bunch of reefs out there. The intelligence was supposed to determine when they should come ashore, so they get up over those reefs. Some way or another they missed on it. And those landing barges were hung up on those reefs out there, and they literally got slaughtered. That was bad, it really was.
When we came back to the States for repairs after the Philippines, they added radar synchronized with the 5-inch guns. And they hoped that the radar would help the gunners of the gunnery people hit the planes with the 5-inch guns. The only trouble was that we did not have any time to really test them. And the first time we would fire the 5-inch guns, after I would say they were coming in and at what altitude and what speed, they would fire around and it would cause the radar to go out. So then I would just walk over to the door and look out and watch the planes come in, because I couldn't fix it during a battle.
On the way up, we had to go to Darwin, Australia to pick up some of our equipment. And, we got near Darwin and the boilers went out on our boat, and we were sitting out in Timor Sea for about 3 days, and all we had patrolling us was a Lockheed Hudson patrol bomber. They would fly over in the morning and at noon and in the evening scouting for submarines. And on that trip we went through the Timor Sea, and the Timor Sea is the most beautiful body of water you would ever want to see. It's just like a mirror. You could see the seaweed down in the water and the snakes down in the water. It was really fascinating.
This would fit on the end of the rifle, and this would slide in to the butt back there, so that they would use it as a weapon to fight with at close quarters.
After you're there, you more or less get accustomed with these things. You know, you have a different feeling for it. You never really get over being scared. Anybody says they wasn't scared is not telling the truth. Because I'm sure everybody was in there were scared at one time or another. I was scared several times, but I think that was my first and worst experience. Not knowing the uncertainty of what was going to happen. I saw ships get hit, saw ammunition ship hit, and it just disintegrated. When the smoke cleared away, there was nothing left of these things. You see things like that happen, where it hardens you to a certain extent.
But we was only 50 miles off of the coast of Vladivostok when the Russians come into war on the 7th of August. And they come in the war, and we were supposed to be friendly. They come in to help us. But we got more aerial bombs that night than we got all during the war. We had to dive 5 times that night just to Russians, every time we come up, they'd come over and drop some bombs, and we had to hide. We'd get down before they got there. We could see, we had the radar to pick them up, but then they dropped the bombs. But they was wasting them. They wasn't real close to us. But they wanted to get rid of their bombs. They hadn't got to use any all during the war.
And then we had one guy, I guess this was the first guy to missile. They took a drone. I don't know if you know what a drone is. It's an unmanned aircraft that they used to target shoot at it. They'd fly them into the ship. And this is how the guys practice with their 20 calibers or 50s or the 5-inch guns. They'd shoot at the airplane coming in. It was unmanned, so nobody would get hurt. And they put a TV camera in the nose of this plane, and they took it up with another aircraft, and he had a screen up there, and they had a ship out there, and it was, of course, it had a charge of gunpowder in it, and they actually blew the ship up with the drone. And I always felt that this was the first guided missile that we ever had.
And Cape Gloucester was part of New Britain Island. The Japanese had a big naval base up on the far end of the island, and every day they'd send some planes down and they'd drop some bombs on us, just nuisance raids all over. Well, they told us in school, they said if somebody ever tells you that they can see rain with a radar, it says that's not true. You cannot do it. You can't see rain. Well, we took it seriously. Now, this was a long time before they knew what they know now. Well, one night we came up. I guess it was about daybreak or something. I forget now what time of the day it was. We seen thousands of pips out there. And we thought, boy, that must be sandpans coming there, getting ready to make a landing on here, man. We was getting ready to get geared up, and man, we were scared. It kept getting closer and closer and closer, and all of a sudden it just started raining to beat the band. So we told them, we told our officers about that, about what they thought. They said, they can certainly see rain because that's what that is, and all those sandpans we seen was rain. We recorded, you know. But up to that time, they didn't realize that that you could see rain. Radar was a very new thing. They didn't know that. And now, of course, that's the main thing about radar. Now the Germans was working on radar, the U.S. was, and so was Britain. All of them working on rain time.
I went across the equator at the international date line, and it's 180 degrees and 000, and because we did that, this is out of the shipping area. So not too many people cross the international date line and the equator at the same time. So we got certificates, and we're known as flying shellbacks because we crossed over at that certain point. We had a lot of fun. It took about 3-4 days. They had us, we had 2 rolls of toilet paper taped together, and we had to stand up on the flight deck and look for King Neptune to come aboard. And you had to have some fun. You had to get rid of your energy. Like I said, we'd be out for 2-3 months, and you get on each other's nerves.
Now, after the war in Europe ended, then the British started sending ships and men over in the Pacific to help us. But as far as the actual fighting in the Pacific, practically all over by the time they got out there. We were bombing Japan. That's really why they developed the B-29 bomber, to have a long-range bomber so they could bomb Japan. To Tokyo, which I got to visit on Liberty while we were there, was a ghost town. They had burned it. It was about a 4-block square section downtown of masonry buildings was all that was left. Everything else was destroyed. Majority of those buildings over there were what we would call tar paper buildings at that time. And our planes had firebombed them. They'd set a fire and burn out a whole section of town at one time. You know. There was very little left in Tokyo when I got there.
Whenever we crossed the equator, they gave us this slip of paper indicating that we had done so, and you had no choice but to participate in the celebration that the people who had already been there, they'd grab you, strip your clothes off, paint you all up all over, then turn a fire hose on you. And you did it or else. They had one fellow who said he wasn't going to have any part of it. Well, they picked him up, held him over the side of the ship, and he begged like a good fellow to get back, and they took care of him. So that was just a certificate indicating that you had crossed the equator. It was one of those things that the people did.
One of the more interesting things that occurred was we crossed the equator going over to the South Pacific, and they have a big initiation for those who've already crossed the equator, and it's sort of like Hell Week in college. They do all sorts of mean things to you, and but it was enjoyable crossing the equator.
When we went on land, a non-com, like I was, a non-commissioned officer, we weren't allowed to carry any weapons on foreign land. All we had was a billy club, and I stood shore patrol all the time because I was a petty officer. And we were up against people with knives and guns, and finally we told them that we had to have some protection. And he ended up that every 2 enlisted men had one officer with them, and the officer was permitted to carry a weapon on foreign land. And that's the only protection we had. And these people were poor, and sailors didn't have that much money, but they had more money than what the people were that lived on these islands. And they'd rob our people, our men. And some of them would go to a bar and get feeling pretty good, and next thing you know, somebody hit them on the head and took all their money. And we'd have to haul these people back, and I've seen men get liquor that was made by the natives, and I don't know what it was, but these people, some of them died from the alcohol that they got. It was poison, really.
We were on a LST bound for Hiroshima when the atomic bomb was dropped for the first time.
I was just glad it was over with, because if the war hadn't ended, I'd have been in it, because we were following up all the other battles that were over there. And I'm just glad that it was over.
But that was a great day when we got the news the war was over. And I went into the day the peace treaty was signed in Tokyo Bay, 1st of September. My ship went in with the fleet when they went in to occupy it. And the Japanese were in such bad financial condition and short of materials to fight with that we had to give some of their ships fuel so they could go and pick up their troops on the outlying islands. Japan is made up of a lot of islands, you know. It's not a large country, it's a series of islands. And they had troops on all these little islands, and they didn't have fuel to send their ships out to pick them up and bring them home. So we filled 2 ships the first afternoon after we got in Tokyo Bay. And they come alongside, and the water in Tokyo Bay was filthy. There's 2 big cities on Tokyo Bay, Tokyo and Yokohama. Both of them were large cities when the war started. And they dumped their raw sewage right in Tokyo Bay, and you could see it full of, the odor was terrible. And just about everybody on my ship got sick with dysentery while we were there. And we was there for a week or 10 days. And when we left, time we got out to sea, 2 days' time, everybody got well. They got over their dysentery. But that was quite an experience to see those Japanese, how they did it. And these ships come alongside of us along the afternoon to fuel.
We were probably more like ambassadors after the war, because we went to Australia, Sydney, Australia. We were down there for about a week. And we went to all these islands, and we talked to the natives, and on truck we had a chaplain. He was a missionary, and he was a Catholic priest, and he came over to talk to us because he hadn't seen any white people for a long time. And I noticed that his gums were all black. And of course I said, how'd your gums turn black? And the Japanese would hit him in the mouth with the butt of their guns, and they treated some people pretty cruel.
The impact of the Pacific Theater on the outcome of the war can only be measured by our veterans' personal sacrifice and dedication to their country. While the war with Japan turned many ordinary men and women into heroes, the advancement in technology would ultimately end the war.